Everybody, I'm Charlie Lennon, your executive leadership coach, speaker, and trainer, and I am excited to welcome you all to the Communicate to Lead Virtual Leadership Conference. I am so excited to be able to bring you all another fantastic speaker here with us today. Richelle, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Charlie. Thank you for having me.
Yay! It's a nice little reunion because so many years ago, Richelle and I had the opportunity to attend a leadership summit, and we're roommates back in the day for that.
Going full
So it's
circle, now
fun.
we're talking about leadership. I won't mention the number of years later.
Exactly. We've been using our skincare products, so people won't be able to guess how
Not at
many
all.
moons.
Not at all. Hello, face yoga.
Wonderful. So if you could please introduce yourself, Richelle, tell them who you are and a little bit about your company.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Richelle Delia, and I have a consulting firm where I help CEOs, business owners, and experts really monetize their expertise and bring it into a way where they can develop their own intellectual property in a way where they build their own audience so they're not having to hustle and really try to break away from the noise. Because let's be honest, the market is so oversaturated. It is full of noise, and it's really hard to differentiate yourself. So I help people that are experts actually show their expertise in a way that feels professional and aligned with themselves.
Yes, we all need a Richelle in our life. That's awesome. So you really work with those business owners to really make sure that the work that they're doing is worth it. And so I my hat is off to you, and I think that's commendable.
Yeah, absolutely. I come from a technical background. I'm a chemical engineer by training. And so I really know what it's like to be that individual contributor that's really trying to substantiate your value in the workforce, and that same struggle, is not just isolated to a person in corporate. It's something that transcends regardless if you are an individual contributor in a larger organization, if you're in a managerial role, or if you're someone who is out on your own and really trying to build your own enterprise. Regardless, you really have to consolidate your messaging in a way where people can actually hear you.
Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit more about that because I know you did a phenomenal TED Talk about this. And so, we have a lot of folks that are looking for that leadership title. And I know that you have some work around not necessarily needing the title to lead. So talk to me about what you would say to those that are potentially emerging leaders. How can they really showcase themselves to lead without that title?
Absolutely. It's really a balance against the ego, honestly, right? Because everyone wants accolades and everyone wants to see their name in lights. And so it can be really challenging, to your point, when you don't necessarily have the title. And so to your point, yes, I gave a TEDx talk. It is called Net Operating Influence. And really, how do you influence other people, even when you're not in a position of what I like to call an authority position, but you may have situational authority. Okay. So that means that again, from a corporate standpoint, if I'm in an organization, I may not have direct reports. I may not have people who have reporting responsibility to me, but there are certainly situations where I am in a leadership capacity and I have the leading role. And so how do you really navigate that in a framework where you can still exercise your leadership skills even when that title is not necessarily bestowed upon you? And so I like to say it really is a function of self-leadership. And so we were chatting just before we started recording that ironically, I did get a trademark on this, and it's called the TEST method. So TEST. And so it's a whole framework around really engaging other people, again, when you're not necessarily in a position of reporting authority. It's really about building trust. That is the foundation. So that's the first thing. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But the first thing you really want to do is build trust, because where there's trust, there's credibility. And where there's credibility, that means that people can really engage over time. And then you can take them on whatever journey it is that you want to.
Absolutely. And I think people's ears just perked up when they heard that because, leadership is more than just a title. quite frankly, some people may realize they don't even want the title or need the title for the leadership that they want to do. And
Mhm.
so I think that's powerful for you to make mention of how you can still do what you want without
Mhm.
that title. So thank you for kind of talking to that.
Yeah, absolutely. When I know you do a decent amount of corporate consulting and workshops, and
Yes.
when I go into organizations, I obviously help a lot on the technical professional side because that's my background, so there's congruency there. And so what I notice is that going the managerial route, it feels sexy, if I might say. It has some shine and some allure because you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get all these additional responsibilities. But sometimes they're just playing the title swapping game. They may not necessarily get additional compensation. They do get more responsibility, but the responsibility to compensation balance may not necessarily be there. And so, as I mentioned before, it really is about checking your ego and really deciding, where do I want to make a contribution, and where is that contribution going to lead to the maximum output, whatever that looks like for me, my goals, and my family's wallet. And it may not necessarily mean chasing the title, and really deciding if that's okay with you or not. So, I personally made the strategic decision that I was not going to go after title chasing, because it wasn't in alignment with where I wanted to spend my time and where I thought I was going to get the best compensation for my efforts.
Good. So we get more time with you.
Exactly.
Yes, good decision. I agree with you because when I'm talking to my clients and as I go into organizations, I like to go back to the why. Because if you're wanting to be in a leadership role just for that fancy title, then you'll burn out and you'll burn out fast.
Absolutely.
Quick fuse. And so you have to really take the time to develop who you are first and figure out what you really want out of this so that you can determine which route you want to go. And so I always tell people that if you're going into leadership just so that you could say, I'm the boss, you've got a rude awakening and it's not worth it. Because, like you said, you don't always necessarily get that additional compensation. You will get additional work, but you may not, it's not as shiny and pretty as it always seems to be. Leadership is a heavy, heavy load.
And if I may, leadership honestly is about the team that you're leading. So, not to circle back to the test method, but the last T is about team, because really, if you are a true leader, it's about empowering other people around you as opposed to being very self-centered. And so leadership is about essentially dying to yourself. It's dying to that
Mhm.
ego and saying, how can I really allow the people around me? How can I elevate them so that they can perform at their best? And that's honestly what leadership is all about.
Absolutely. So, there's a big piece with all of this that you said you're in corporate America, but then you also are coaching business owners and
Mhm.
leaders. That's a lot to manage. And I think as leaders or emerging leaders, this is a conversation that is an ongoing one. There's not enough time in the
Never
day.
enough time in the
And
day.
so, exactly. What are some strategies or techniques that you recommend to help people be able to manage the stress and all that comes with those moving pieces?
Mhm. So a few thoughts. First, stress is a signal. Okay. It's a signal that there is something unresolved or something that hasn't been properly dealt with. So, anytime there's frustration, anytime there's stress, anytime there is a tension, it's also an opportunity. I'm reminded of a story back in the day. There used to be pirates that were, out in the sea, arg, and they would look for seagulls. Okay. Whenever they would see a seagull in the sky, that seagull meant that they were close to land. And so I like to think about my life in, where am I seeing seagulls? So a seagull is where maybe I'm feeling stressed in a particular situation. Maybe I feel a tinge of jealousy if someone is doing something, right? All those things are methods of communication back to ourself. And that shows you where you may not be acting in alignment with what your true goals are or what your true desires are. And so the best thing I can tell you is, one, look for the seagulls in your life and take note. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to take action immediately, but certainly take note. Okay. Once you take note, then you can determine, my scientist is about to show, fair warning, I like to have a decision-making rubric. And so that rubric says, these are my core values and these are the things that I really want. These are the things that I really desire. And these are the things that really will be impactful for me. And then based on that, I can now use this rubric as a filter for any opportunities to pass through. So, earlier this year, you and I reconnected on a variety of fronts, but mostly because I decided to burn down my entire business and build it back up again. And that's because, I'm a young mom. And so I'm not that young. My baby's young. Okay. But, I wanted to think about how I could be more effective with my time. And so I really started to study this concept of how do I do more with less? And how do I really collapse the result and opportunity in a finite time input? And so I started studying this. One of my favorite marketing mentors is a gentleman named Dan Kennedy. And I was actually in Dallas, in Texas, visiting him for one of his conferences, specifically for this event. So he had a conference, and it was all about the concept of collapsing time. In his words, he called it triggering the phenomenon. And so, I'm not going to be super long-winded, but if you've ever heard of people in Hollywood, for example, talking about getting their big break, they're like, oh, I've been working so hard, and then all of a sudden, I got my big break. Or you may have heard someone say, I worked 10 years to become an overnight success. So this person came out of nowhere. No, what they did was they hit up on a phenomenon, which means you're working, and then boom, it's this one thing that changes everything. So anyway, I have been a student of this structure. And how do you not just recognize this opportunity when it comes, but even more so, how do you encourage, strategically cause to happen, and take advantage of when these situations happen in your own life and your own experience? The normal and an average person is going to get these experiences about every decade. When you think back about your life, there are some times when you're like, man, that one decision, that really was a game changer for me and for where I am today. And so how do you encourage more of those things to happen on purpose, more quickly, and in short order? And so that whole concept of, I like to call it collapsing time. So how do I really structure opportunities so that I can do more with less and have more outputs from my inputs? And so the free gift that I have for everyone is a training literally called Collapse Time. Again, I'm a scientist, not that creative with the naming. And so it really walks you through a methodology of how you can incorporate this into your own strategic planning process. So how do you do more in the next 3 months than you've done in the previous 3 years? And a lot of it comes down to having that clarity, like we talked about in the decision-making framework, so that what does the other side of the phenomenon, what does that look like to you? Does that look like being in the managerial role? Maybe. Does it look like having more time? Maybe. I don't know. So in my case, because I have a young baby, just to come full circle, I was like, man, I really want to spend more time with, I call him baby B. And so if I am working corporate, that means I'm working 40 hours a week. But the ideal schedule, let's be honest, we all would like to work maybe half that amount of time. Okay, so 20 hours a week is something that I think most people would feel is reasonable, where I'm still doing a contribution, but I have a lot of family time. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to place limits on myself. What if I could take this to the next level? And I did, instead of 40 hours per week, I cut it in half. And instead of doing 20 hours per week, what if I could have a thriving consultancy that I do in less than 20 hours per month? So I really challenged my thinking about that. And so what would that delivery model look like? What would that container look like? What would that business model look like, where my clients still feel well served, they feel well taken care of, and they feel guided on the process, but my time is not a rate limiting step. And so that's exactly what I have implemented for myself, and have been now showing other people how they can do so as well. Not necessarily my business model, but that's that what I deliver in that container is a structure that allows me to do so in about 16 hours of client-facing time per month. And so anyway, if you want to go through this mindset and thought process, I do highly encourage you to download the Collapse Time framework. So sorry, that was a more long-winded answer, but hopefully answered the question.
It takes time. Yeah, it's not always a quick answer. But what I was listening to, that I always speak to, that solves a lot of our problems, is making sure that you just have a plan. And that doesn't mean that you can't pivot from the plan, but it goes back to being able to slow down, to go fast. And so what I'm hearing you say is, we're talking about collapsing time. You can't just do that out of nowhere. You have to
No,
actually be methodical, sit down, slow down, and figure out what is it that you want, and then what
mhm,
steps are you going to take to get there. And then when the
absolutely.
step happens and it doesn't hit the way you want it to, what
Mhm,
plan do you have to pivot, to move around it, to change it up, and not feel stuck? And so
mhm.
I think what you're talking about is dynamic and definitely something that those that are in leadership can really take advantage of. And so thank you for kind of going through that process with us.
Absolutely. It's something you and I have talked about previously. It's,
Yeah,
you have a hypothesis, you go out to the
right.
market, you get data, and then you iterate based on it. It's not gonna be perfect the first time, but what you will get is data to know how you can edit
Mhm.
going forward. So
Right.
people like the idea of pivoting. It's not always pivoting. Sometimes it's just
Mhm.
editing and
Mhm.
editing the process and saying, how do I tweak and maneuver?
Mhm.
Because everything works. Literally
Mhm.
everything works. Everything on the internet, every business book, it all works. It
Mhm.
absolutely all works. But you have to figure out how it works for you. And that's
Right.
where the secret sauce comes in.
Absolutely. Well, I have enjoyed talking to you so much, Rochelle. I mean, I think that we could go on and on for days if we
We
had the
can, and we
opportunity.
do.
Exactly. But both of us have little ones. So just like you said, we have to maximize our time. But before you leave, I would just love for you to share just I know you've shared so many wonderful nuggets, but if you just could give one piece of advice, what would be that one piece of advice that you could provide someone who is in a leadership role, whether that being a business owner, if you want to take that angle, or an emerging leader, emerging business owner? What would your one piece of advice be for them?
Regardless of your career path, um, figure out your own true north. A lot of people are adopting the goals and the mindset of others and just trying to copy paste into their own life. And when they go down that path, they realize that it's like a hollow accolade, like it feels bittersweet because it doesn't actually embody what it is that they truly want. There again, another adage is that you can find yourself climbing the ladder, and then when you get to the top, you look out, and it's not the view that you were intending to achieve. So really think about where you're going and what does success look like to you. And I know everyone says it, and it feels like a canned answer, but it really is true. And when you get clear, and the hard part is because there's so many options. And so sometimes it's easier to know what you don't want as opposed to what you do want. And that's okay. It gets you closer to where it is that you're going. And then if you just build on the path closer and closer to what it is you want to create, then eventually you'll get there, or at least get close, within striking distance. So that'll be my advice. Really try to get honest with yourself about what it is that you want. What I don't think necessarily happiness is the goal. That's kind of based on your emotions. But what does your ideal life look like? Your ideal career look like? Family life, so forth and so on. And then strip away everything that is not congruent with that. And then go head first towards whatever feels closest to that. And then the refinement will happen in the process.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love that advice. I think that's something that we can literally implement tomorrow, like just, or even really within this next minute. It's
Mhm.
never too late to slow down, stop, and think about what do you want your life to look like? How do you want to feel in your daily actions? And then let's create a plan to do that and to knock that out the park. So I thank you so much, Rochelle, for you coming on this Communicate to Lead leadership conference and sharing your insights and expertise with our audience. And if people want to connect with you further, please tell us, how can we find you?
Well, the easiest way to do so is to obviously download the resource that will join you in addition to getting the gift. It will also add you to my email list, which is where I am the most active and, dare I say, the most prolific. um, but certainly I'm available on all the socials, Rochelle with an I. So like Michelle, Rochelle, down the middle, R-I, Delia, PhD. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I'm not that active on Instagram, to be honest. But Facebook and LinkedIn are probably my two most popular social medias, if that is your choice. But email is absolutely number one in my world.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Rochelle, for being here. I appreciate you. It's always so fun to talk to you.
It's a
And
pleasure.
thank you, yes, and thank you everybody for joining another session of Communicate to Lead Virtual Leadership Conference. I look forward to continuing our relationship. Have a great day.